What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and welcome back to the Rumor Roundup, our weekly series where we cover all the news and rumors that you may have missed over the course of the week. And it's Halloween! That time of year when we let our children collect candy from strangers in the hopes that they won't poison them. And we have... That's pretty dark, man. We have an interesting episode today. One, because the news is kind of limited, but we also have some pretty interesting announcements for you guys. And hopefully you guys can understand me pretty well. Fingers crossed. I guess we'll have to wait until post to find out whether or not the audio works. So let's start with the big talking point that everybody's bringing up this week, which is that Eternals has a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, which makes it the worst reviewed Marvel Cinematic Universe movie since Thor: The Dark World. And this is interesting, right? Because we're seeing reviews coming from different directions. There are people who on the negative side are saying the movie's overstuffed. They're saying the cast is forgettable and boring. They're saying that the film's just way too complex. That is the worst Marvel movie in years. And then we have people on the other side of the equation saying the film is fantastic. There's a lot of history there. That it's a really intriguing piece of cinema that will establish the Marvel cosmos, and people just can't quite appreciate it yet. And regardless of which side you sit on, I think we can all agree the movie seems to be pretty polarizing. Now, we do have to include here, apparently what's been going on is people are saying the movie's been review bombed by people, saying that there is a gay kiss in the film. People don't like that. But if I'm being honest with you guys, I think there's a couple reasons why this film is not really receiving the kind of welcome that Marvel Cinematic Universe films have received in the past, especially considering this is the first film of its kind that we're getting. And I think the first thing has to do with the nature of the characters. In all honesty, as a guy who's been reading Marvel Comics for 25 years, one of the things that I've learned is that by and large, no one cares about the Eternals. They're like the Inhumans. They exist, but no one cares that they exist, largely because the nature of the Eternals is such that their role isn't really necessary. That in Marvel Comics, the Eternals serve as what is kind of a protector of the human race, and they do that at the demands or the orders of the Celestials. But in the face of teams like the X-Men and the Avengers and Alpha Flight and Fantastic Four and Excalibur, and the list goes on and on and on, Big Hero 6, which was a comic book superhero team from Marvel before it was a Disney movie, which was actually a pretty great film. There's a lot of heroes out there that exist to protect the world. So you don't really need the Eternals. And that's the biggest issue that you've had in Marvel Comics over the years, is that the Eternals just really seem unnecessary. They just don't really matter at all. And that's the reason why, if you go and you look over the history of the Eternals in Marvel Comics, you do have the old Jack Kirby stories, which were interesting. But by and large, if you asked me, Rob, what Eternals stories should I read to get ready for the movie? I'd say read Eternals Volume 1 by Neil Gaiman, issues 1 through 7, even though it was supposed to be 6. And then follow up with Eternals by Charles Knopf, which was actually an immediate follow-up to Neil Gaiman's story, and that one lasted 9 issues, and then you're done. Never read anything from the Eternals ever from anybody else, because it doesn't matter. I mean, you could read Kieran Gillen's run right now, but in reality, it's too early to know whether or not the run's going to have any major meaningful impact on Marvel as a whole. It's cool in terms of the story, but the point that I'm getting at here is that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is making a movie about characters that in the comics don't matter. And in the comics, audiences don't really care. And so it's hard to take a character or team in the comics that no one cares about and then throw them into the MCU and try to get people to care about them. Now, you could point the finger at Iron Man, and you could say Iron Man was a super obscure character before he was made into a movie, that the Marvel Cinematic Universe had to actually convince people that he wasn't a robot before the movie was made. But in all reality, Iron Man was hugely popular for comic book readers who were reading Marvel Comics. Civil War, Force Works, all kinds of different things made Iron Man a prominent character. People outside the comics just didn't really know who he was. But again, no one who reads Marvel Comics really cares about the Eternals. So it's kind of hard to make people who don't read comics interested in the Eternals. Now again, this is Rotten Tomatoes, right? So these are people who believe that movies are inherently works of art, in which case, I don't know how you explain Frankenfish. But the important thing is that these are a select few number of people. So when you go into the film, ignore the positive reviews and ignore the negative reviews. Just watch the movie and make your own determination on whether or not you enjoy it. I'm certainly going to be doing that. The other reason why I think this movie might be struggling is because if you look at the history of Earth in Marvel Comics, even only including the Celestials and leaving everything out, including like the Demigorge or Demiurge, if you want to call them that, Chthon and like Sidorak and like all these old monsters and beings, Shumagorath, who ruled the earth at one point in time, you focus only on the Celestials, that's still a lot of history there, and that's still complex, way more than you can really cram into a 2.5 hour long movie, especially when you condense it down to what will most likely be a 15 to 20 minute explanation, if that, and expect people to be able to walk away fully comprehending what they're seeing. That's a tall order, right? I firmly believe that like the history of Earth in the Marvel Cinematic Universe should be a series that's released on Disney Plus. I've been saying that for a long time, right? I mean, we did a history of the Marvel Universe, and just the segments on Earth alone took us about an hour to do. It's just that much going on there. So again, it's one of these things where it could be just a scenario where they try to cram too much into a singular film. At the end of the day, we won't know until we see it, but I'll know I'm going to go into it with an open mind. I'm not going to worry about any reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. I usually never do, and then just kind of make my own determination from there. Now, the next little tidbit here is actually a really entertaining piece of news. Apparently, all you guys out there who are just really excited for the Spider-Man No Way Home trailer, the final trailer, are just like review bombing everything that Sony releases that's not the Spider-Man No Way Home trailer, in the sense that like, if it's not the trailer, it just gets massive amounts of dislikes. I mean, in reality, let's kind of put this into context. In reality, Sony's a huge corporation, and so likes and dislikes on their various videos in terms of the YouTube algorithm don't matter. When you become a YouTuber, one of the things you learn is that one, likes and dislikes don't really matter all that much, and two, what little effect they do have on a video doesn't apply to major corporations. They kind of get special treatment, right? They can kind of do whatever they want to because they're major corporations, and they just give so much money to YouTube, right? So rules for thee, not for me. It's kind of how it works when it comes to corporations and YouTube as a whole. That said, it is funny because it's the digital equivalent of all these people sitting in like a restaurant waiting for food, not getting it, and then just like stomping on the table and chanting, "Food, food, food." That's basically what this is. I think it's kind of funny, right? I mean, once you step back and you realize it has no real bearing on Sony, it's kind of funny. You know, I think it's entertaining. At the very least, it is people just kind of voicing their desire to Sony. Whether or not Sony will listen, I don't know. I imagine that trailer's already on YouTube, and it has been for a while, and it's just scheduled. We're just waiting for the day when it comes out because it's scheduled to come out on that day. In truth, what Sony's actually doing, and this kind of segues into our next thing, the trailer for Morbius, the new trailer anyway, according to Daniel RPK, as you guys know, the guy whose leaks and all that kind of stuff always usually proves to be accurate, that trailer is supposed to come out this coming Tuesday at the time we're recording this video. If that really is the case, it's a smart move by Sony. And the reason why is because we know Morbius is basically in the MCU. From the first trailer that we saw, where you basically had the graffiti that pointed that Spider-Man was essentially a killer, that kind of a thing. So obvious references to the aftermath of Spider-Man Far From Home and the death of Mysterio. I imagine a lot of people will go into the Morbius trailer looking to see little Easter eggs, wondering if there's going to be any kind of involvement or exploration on what we already know in terms of its role in the MCU as it relates to Spider-Man. So while it's not a full-on Spider-Man Far From Home trailer, at the very least, it does give us at least a kind of tease, or at least something to kind of keep our appetite slightly satiated as we wait for a new Spider-Man trailer. That said, I do think it's going to get disliked all to hell because it's not Spider-Man No Way Home. And it's actually a trailer for Morbius instead of Spider-Man No Way Home. So regardless, I think it's still going to get hammered, but I think it kind of will quell people a little bit. Not only that, the important thing here to understand when it comes to that movie is, one, it's kind of the forgotten MCU film, right? A lot of us, I imagine, forgot that Morbius was coming out last year. I personally didn't. I've been looking forward to it just because of the fact that the introduction of Morbius, along with the reworking of Blade, as well as the possibility of Ghost Rider being thrown into the MCU, the details on that are pretty scant. We don't know if it's going to be like Danny Ketch or Johnny Blaze or Robbie Reyes or whoever. I don't even think there's any casting announcements or anything. I think it's just one of those, somewhere along the line, it will be coming. But we are getting like Werewolf by Night. We had Doctor Strange. The stage is set for the Midnight Suns. And so I'm really looking forward to that, and Morbius is just one of the pieces of that puzzle. So I didn't forget about the film, but I imagine a lot of people had. And so Sony throwing out the Morbius trailer before they released the trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home is smart, because right now, everyone's eyes are on Sony's YouTube channel waiting for the release of Spider-Man No Way Home. So even if Morbius gets a bunch of negative attention, any attention is better than no attention. So I think it's a pretty smart move for them to go that route in terms of releasing that trailer before they release Spider-Man No Way Home. But as the final little tidbit here for this episode, before we get into some really important announcements regarding hiring here at Geek Culture Explained and Comics Explained as well, rumors are circulating around about this idea that Dr. Octopus somehow managed to get his hands on Stark tech, and that's actually seen in a lot of the stills that we have from Spider-Man No Way Home when he's fighting Spider-Man, that his tentacles are basically the same color as the Iron Man suit. Now, as you can imagine, this has both excited people, but also kind of irritated people a little bit. And the reason for this is because people are excited at the possibility that the legacy of Tony Stark lives on, that Dr. Octopus somehow managed to find a way to use Stark tech to either create tentacles or to enhance tentacles. But for the people who are a little exasperated here, I understand where they're coming from, because this idea seems to hit on the notion that, like, the MCU just cannot move past Iron Man, right? That everything somehow ties into the legacy of Iron Man. Now, I think the legacy of Iron Man is important. I think the idea of tying back into the things that Iron Man has done over the years and how his impact on the MCU still continues on. But I do understand the idea that, like, not everything needs to involve Stark Tech or Iron Man in some form or fashion. Now, having said that, in terms of the tentacles themselves, a lot of theories have come out about this. So on one side, a lot of people are saying that when it comes to the tentacles of Dr. Octopus being based on Stark tech, that this is an indication that Otto Octavius has been in the MCU for a while. That either he lost his tentacles when he was brought into the MCU, or somewhere along the line they were destroyed, deactivated, or he simply just cast off the old ones and created new ones using Stark tech. It's a cool theory, but honestly, I think it's a little too far-fetched given the context of the film, at least as we understand it. The more plausible theory here is that the tentacles themselves are the result of Dr. Octopus basically fighting Spider-Man when he has the Iron Spider suit, and then stripping the suit away from him because it's based on nanotechnology, and then incorporating the nanotechnology of that suit into his tentacles. So quite literally, he's got a hold of Peter Parker, the suit leaves Peter Parker's body, bonds itself to his tentacles, and that's where you get that shot from. Honestly, I like that theory a lot more. It makes a lot more sense, and it actually brings everything full circle. And the reason why is because it allows Peter Parker to leave the legacy of Iron Man behind. That when you look at Spider-Man Homecoming, that came off the heels of Civil War. So in a lot of ways, both Spider-Man's appearance in Civil War and the film Homecoming itself was really him just kind of being tutored by Iron Man, taught what it means to be a superhero and that kind of thing. When you get to Far From Home, that's the aftermath of Iron Man dying. So a lot of the scenes that we saw with Spider-Man during Infinity War, that kind of led, of course, into him basically disappearing, but coming back and having to deal with the idea that his mentor is essentially gone. So we had to kind of stand on his own 2 feet and understand what it meant to really be a hero absent the influence of Iron Man. You get into No Way Home, and I would imagine this is really just Peter Parker kind of becoming his own hero now, right? Leaving the legacy of Iron Man behind, walking away. What better way to fulfill that idea than to remove the Iron Spider suit from Spider-Man, thereby removing the last will and testament, that last little tidbit of the Iron Man legacy from Peter Parker, and throwing him into the role of fully becoming his own Spider-Man, right? The blue and red iconic suit. This would be doubly more important if we got something akin to Brian Michael Bendis' Spider-Man, right? That story was a story where Miles Morales was Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe following the death of that universe's Peter Parker, and then Peter Parker from the main Marvel Universe met Miles Morales and said, "I give you my blessing as Spider-Man." That Tom Holland fully becoming Spider-Man comes by way of him meeting Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. And between them, it's all kind of like, yeah, man, you're as much a Spider-Man as we are. Be your own guy. Do your own thing. Be your own hero. And that solidifies Tom Holland as the Spider-Man that we know and love going forward into the future of the MCU, or if that doesn't happen, in the rebooted Sonyverse featuring those Spider-Man films. So, with all that out of the way, and as mentioned previously, I am looking to expand, and I'm hiring people here at Geek Culture Explained and also at Comics Explained. I'm actually hiring for a few positions, 2 positions really. The first one is for an anime/manga podcast. So, if you live in the northern Colorado area, so like Fort Collins, Longmont, Greeley, then check out the link in the description, which will send you to the application form for the anime manga podcast here at Geek Culture Explained. Now, if you don't live in northern Colorado, that position's not for you. But the position at Comics Explained might be. So I'm looking for a writer/researcher for Comics Explained podcast. So if that's interesting to you, make sure you check in the link in the description for that application. Make sure you fill them out, and that's all you have to do. Just hit send when you're done, and they'll automatically be sent to me. I will comb through them, and if I am interested in bringing you on, then we'll go further from there. I'll talk about the pay and all that kind of good stuff, so you kind of know what you're getting into. So with that being said, guys, hopefully I hear from you. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.